various countries and taught um, in these environments. So our guest has spent years teaching communication, marketing in Afghanistan and other countries. I believe 6, 7 countries, Arnie, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And has worked directly with students, in various uncertain environments. And he was in Afghanistan during the 2021 regime collapse as well. And he was teaching at the American University of Afghanistan at the time. So our discussion today is not much of a theoretical discussion, but we will explore what it means to teach when institutions are under strain and political realities are shifting and students kind of their needs change and what they look for. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Arnie, and we'll explore various themes, teaching, communication, and so on. Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Lutfi, and I appreciate the opportunity. It's one of those things where when you live something, you sort of don't think much about what it means, and except for just you're doing what you have to do. And Afghanistan is exactly that kind of a lived experience. I've been there since 2018 with the American University of Afghanistan, and so in those, yeah, let's put it this way, in those years, it's uh, I've packed in events and occurrences and experiences that I think very few, if any, educators would ever imagine they would go through in a lifetime, let alone in less than 8 years. So
That's true.
so in a sense, it's been a it's kind of felt like living in a crisis for 8 years solid. Although my crisis is nothing compared to what students and my colleagues in Afghanistan have experienced.
Yes, yes. It's interesting. There's an interesting overlap. You said you went to Afghanistan in 2018.
Yeah.
I moved back to Afghanistan to live there full time in 2018, at the very
Okay.
beginning of 2018.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh, it, and I started teaching at the American University in January of 2018. So
Yes, you came
it's
recommended to me at the time as I was the chair of the business department, and so yes, you were actually one of the influx of new young Afghans that I really wanted to bring in to the university. I was only able to get, I think, 2 women at the time. I would have liked to get more. I did get a couple more later on, but there was young, talented, educated Afghans, and I do remember meeting with you all back then and saying to you then, you know, there's the Westerners are all in charge, but maybe 10 years from now, I would like to see the Afghans being in charge at this university. Um,
I remember.
hasn't
Yeah.
hasn't materialized yet, but perhaps because there's so many things have changed.
Yes. Yes. A lot has changed since 2018. So just to situate this for the audience and also for listeners later on. Um, so the American University of Afghanistan was founded what in
And six,
2004, 2006,
yeah,
and this was based in Kabul, had eventually evolved into a very large campus and had various numbers of students and international and domestic teachers and instructors and lecturers,
yeah.
and all the way until 2021, where it always had a physical presence. And since then, it's fully online.
Correct. And I think the conversation about this institution began in 2003, 2004, Dr. Fayez, who's sort of the founder of this university, he, was interested in getting the Americans involved, and it's very rare. In fact, it doesn't really exist, but this is the only university that had ever been funded as much as this one is by USAID, as it was then. No longer exists, but there were they had not ever done this, and so their system didn't really fit in with what a university is. I think in the beginning, the university was, it was a trial and error period, and people trying to figure out what exactly to do with this. And I've talked to some people who have been in the past there, and it took a while to turn this organization into a real university, which is not uncommon in a new venture like this. Lots of mistakes are made. Lots of people come in that, you sort of have the funding limited, and therefore you hire what you can, and not always the best kinds of people. Not that they were, bad people, but they were perhaps not particularly educated or experienced in terms of doing what needed to be done to make this a university. But slowly and surely, it developed and improved, and I would say today it is a university that functions like any other university in the world, in the sense of how we try to educate. But I think also that we have a long way to go to get to a place where we will truly be a university like any other, because when you shift, like we've had to shift now from physical to online, that takes time to figure out and navigate in such a way that you understand what you have to do to have great quality education. It's also a matter of ambition. What do you want to be, when you grow up? And as we know, I was mindful of this. I was in India once and was talking to somebody high up in the education ministry in India, and I was asking him, like, well, how many universities are in India? And he said it was something like 3,000 universities in India. I was like, wow, that's a lot. Well, you're a big nation. So I asked the second question, a follow-up. I said, like, well, how many of them are good? And he said 25. So it's sort of, it's a question of like, well, how good do you want to be, and how good can you be? We're not Harvard, obviously, but we are a teaching institution that tries to embark on this road of learning for students, and that's, I think, what we will always be. And I think it's important to recognize that is that we ideally, of course, the universities are a hub for research and development and creation of new things and new knowledge, and that's all great. But there is a subsection of universities in this world, and not just in developing worlds, but elsewhere, even in the United States, where research is a big thing, where we're just educators for the most part. We do provide certain opportunities for research, and our professors do engage in that, but it's not as critical, like it is at a university that focuses on research, where professors teach maybe one or two courses and then do research. Afghanistan cannot afford that. What we do is teach 8 courses over a year and do a little bit of research with it. And that's a reasonable thing, because we're not at the place where we should be a tremendous research university, because what lacks in Afghanistan is not that so much as educating people such as yourself who can then become researchers.
Mhm. Um, I think that I studied in the UK, so I only have the experience of understanding the education system in a different country, which is the UK. And even here, we do have both of those tracks, but most universities have them simultaneously. So you have a teaching track, but also you have a research track. And it's the research track of this is very, very investment heavy. So you need a lot of investment, and you have to be very strategic, and it's a very competitive area. But there are universities who actually do specialize in education and educating track. So they are focused on education. And when professors are hired, they are hired on two different kinds of contracts. So you have an education track or pathway or a research excellence pathway.
Exactly.
So both of those are there. And like you said, I guess Afghanistan at the moment needs the education side of it more, or needs to focus there more than the research side.
Yeah.
But I would like to see it move in both directions, and we do need research. Um, I think the other thing that, as you were speaking, the other thing that occurred to, or the question that came to my head was, how much of a cultural shock was it when you moved to teach in Afghanistan in 2018? So this was a very different environment and a very different political reality that you had moved in 2018. And I can give my perception when I moved back, what happened to me. But if you like to go first, then I can
Yeah.
then I can tell you what happened when we had a power cut, which I
Yeah.
wasn't
Well,
prepared or briefed on.
first of all, I don't get shocked much anymore in my life. It's just there are I've just had too many different experiences, and I go into every situation knowing, this is going to be different, right? So I had I had already lived experiences such as like, well, regular power outage and sort of, I had lived in a country that was Muslim where, call to prayer was a regular thing and things of that nature. So, those things were not unfamiliar to me, and I was ready for that. I think the adjustments were probably the fact that we had to live in basically inside walls. People were not allowed to go outside. There were permissions to go outside a little bit too. Certainly, there was called the green zone and go in there. I had I had never done that, and 2 months into me being there, there was a bombing in the green zone, so that was banned too. So we basically lived inside walls. In I was lucky enough in terms of my job is that I ended up actually venturing outside a lot compared to others. I was drumming up business, if you will, and negotiating contracts with ministries in Afghanistan, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Foreign Affairs. There were different things that we were doing. So I went to several meetings. I would say that I went out just about every week, which others did not experience. And and so I saw things outside, albeit from an armored car with a lot of bodyguards. And I was A36. I was an Arni, because that's security wise, because of Taliban's not exactly favorable of AUAF. There was a fear that things could happen, and not unrealistically so. I don't know if people are familiar with that. In 2016, the university was attacked. There were people who got into the old campus. We had an old campus and a new campus, and there were 16 people killed and over 100 injured in a horrendous attack. So hence the security was extremely heavy. And there were two people who were actually kidnapped around the same time, two men who were our teachers, and they were released it was in 2020, I think they were released. So they were, held captive for 4 years. So there was a reason to be scared that things might happen. So I saw a little bit of Afghanistan, or should I say Kabul, not really Afghanistan, but Kabul. And I saw the poverty. I saw how people were trying to survive. I saw the sort of lawlessness of the streets, if you will, and all the being on streets where rules were not exactly followed and things of that nature. So I had that perspective, and that I'd seen that before elsewhere, so I knew what it meant and knew how emotionally that can affect you. But then there were things such as, we heard gunshots every day, but I found out later on that there was a practice area not far away from us for the armed forces. So it was like, okay, well, you'll probably hear gunshots every day. We heard bombs, their bombs would go off just about once a week, I would say, on average, maybe every 2 weeks. And some of them were close and shook the windows. Some of them were far away. I asked one of our security guys, well, because from my office, I would look out to some of the mountaineers. I said, well, how long will it take for the bomb to get from there to here if there's something that gets sent our way? He said, well, you have about 5 seconds. I said, so, okay, it's only under the desk. I can't go anywhere else then. So you think about that, but I think it's one of those things where you have to just decide either you're going to live your life in fear or you're just going to live your life in the best way you can. And I chose the latter. We had runners at the university, people who would show up, hear all this, hear the helicopters fly over us every day, and just freak out. And they would basically say like, oh, I have to stop by to Qatar and get some additional fun stuff or to buy, or my mother got sick and I have to go back. And then they would just disappear. So there were runners like that. Sometimes they would leave within a week, sometimes in a month, sometimes after a semester. And you sort of have to figure out how can people handle this. For me, the adjustment wasn't that difficult, to be honest. And that may sound weird, but I just made that decision. And I was hired by Andrew Starcher, who was the dean of faculty at the time. And he had sort of prepared me, this is what you're going to see. And I was ready. So mentally, I was fine with it. And again, it may sound weird, but, going out, we were warned about, like, it could be IEDs that would be magnetic IEDs put on the car. Then you have to go to the other side of the car if you see that happening, because you won't get killed, but you get stunned and things of that nature. I was never scared. I really never was. And that, I just decided, okay, well, if it happens, I've lived a good life. So it's just, you have to sort of just decide that in order to function well and focus on what you're supposed to be doing there. So that's sort of the way that I saw it.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to sum it up. I mentioned that I moved to Afghanistan in 2018. Around that time, maybe it was in December 2017, so it must have been a month before that. But it was a slightly different environment for me because I wasn't constrained within
Yes.
the compounds of the university. But it was a very strange thing to not have any security. So basically, take the taxi or your own car and then go to the university gate, and then you go through the security checks, and then you're almost all of a sudden you're inside this compound that is guarded, that is walled. And rightly so, because of those events, horrendous events that happened in 2016. So I can tell you a little bit about the reverse cultural shock kind of thing that I got, which is, believe it or not, a real phenomena. I started teaching in January of 2018, and I was in a class. This was maybe around 6 p.m. And we had been briefed, so I knew the security challenges and things like that, so I wasn't worried too much about the security of the thing. And I was familiar with power outages and things like that as well. And I was traveling back and forward every summer, so I knew Afghanistan. It wasn't like a cutoff completely that I came back from the UK. So I was visiting every summer in the previous years. But when you have a projector in a classroom and you're teaching, and then all of a sudden there is a power outage, so
Mhm.
everybody's in the dark. Students, you, the projector is off, the screen is off completely. I think nobody had mentioned that during the briefing, and when it all went dark, so I asked the students, what do we do? They said, "We'll wait a few minutes, the generators will come back."
Yeah, yeah.
I was like, okay, so that doesn't mean this is the end of our class. But what was very, very shocking was that I had this thing that in the first 10 minutes of my class, I used to ask students, let's share something unrelated to today's talk. So let's talk about something completely general and unrelated to the topic. And the minute I handed over to students, every single one of them for the next 10 days or maybe 15 days, they talked about how they had escaped in 2016.
Mm.
And that was very, very shocking to me. So I had students sitting there in front of me and they said, I jumped out of a second floor window and my ribs broke. And this is how
Mhm.
I got away. And then I ran and then I did this and I did that. And then eventually I got out. And then what I did when I was on the street. And this was, I hadn't thought about it. And interestingly, I hadn't read the news when the attack had happened on the university. So I didn't know. Up until that moment, I was in front of the class. I didn't know that there was an attack at the university in 2 years ago.
Mhm.
So this was very, very shocking to me. So it was a moment of realization. I was like, wow. I mean, these students, they have gone through so much, but they're talking about it and the resilience of them. And I think this links exactly to the point that you made. Either you are afraid and then you cave in, or the second option is basically you go about living your life because the reality is out there and you cannot control it much. And what you
Mhm.
need to do is live in the best way possible and adapt. And I saw these students had adapted and these traumatic events that had happened, and they were still sitting in the class and they were studying and they were talking about it. And they didn't need a psychiatrist, to recover and to go through all of this. I think it was firsthand seeing, resilience and
Mhm.
the ability to move on and actually the want to be educated, I think, which is really, really directly linked to our topic of conversation today. So seeing that, I think, was very, very humbling for me as a person. So the
Mhm.
moment I saw that, I said, you know what? They've been through this and they're standing here and they still want to be educated. And this is the kind of thing that you do not see, and you need to cherish this, and we must continue and give our best. So this was a very good starting point. So for
Mhm.
me at the university, and it was a great lesson as well.
I
I
think,
think I'm going to ask you a question, and then you can pick it up.
yeah.
So in that environment, I think we've painted a picture of what kind of environment it was in
Mhm.
2017, 2018, 2019 didn't change much in terms of education. And we're using AUAF as an example, but you can extrapolate this, to wider environment of Afghanistan. So if the American University had more of a security, other universities had a very similar situation. There was an attack in Kabul University. There were attacks in various other education institutions across the country. But everyday students turned up. They wanted to be educated. They wanted to study. To just widen our conversation beyond the university. Um, how important education becomes in an environment like that.
Well, I- prior to being in Afghanistan. I was in Kosovo, which had been oppressed for a long time by the Serbs. And, these are Kosovar Albanians mostly, and they're Muslim. There's a small Christian faction in Kosovo, mostly who are, from Serbs. But at the time, basically for a while, women were not allowed to go to universities in Kosovo in the 90s. And then that changed. And I was there in 2012. I came there first. And there were so many women at that university who were exceedingly brilliant and driven. And a lot of them talked about, well, I'm doing this not just for myself, but for my mom, or doing it for family. So these are the so-called first generation college students. This is very much true in Afghanistan in general. There are a lot of first generation students all over, not just AUAF, but elsewhere, Herat University, Kabul University and elsewhere. And, I met some of these young people that were not at AUAF, and AUAF was sort of like the pinnacle. If you got in there, that was the best place to be. And we collaborated with these universities with some workshops and meetings and conferences and things like that. And I loved meeting those students because they all had the same drive, if you will, which is, okay, mom and dad couldn't go to a university, but they wanted me to go. And I can go, but my siblings can't go, So you're not going just for yourself, but there is an expectation. The idea for a lot of these young people is that you are going to make the life of your whole family better. So there is a sizable percentage of students who are like that. There are, of course, other reasons and other students like that, or students there that were sons and daughters of the 1% of Afghanistan, of the people who were rich, and all that. But you could see that they had this drive because it meant so much more than it does to most students that I've been exposed to in the world. I saw that in Kosovo. So when I saw that in Afghanistan, it didn't surprise me, but there it was even stronger because it was not just the females, but it was also the males that were driven like that. There was probably the most profound thing that a student said once in a meeting that I had with the students. And I would meet with the students regularly when I was the chair. I would actually have once a month sort of talk with them, invite them to come in and we could talk. We gave them a little bit of snacks and drinks and just say like, okay, so what's going on? What can we do better? Things like that. And they loved that. They'd never been given this type of an opportunity to actually speak up and say, okay, could be done better. But there was a young man, and I don't remember no longer who he was and what his name was. But he said, we're in a hurry to get this because I don't think I'll live past 50. And that hit me really, really hard. He genuinely felt that his life expectancy wouldn't be more than that. And I said to him, it's like, well, why do you think? He said, well, if a bomb or a bullet doesn't get me, the pollution will, or, the circumstances and the poor healthcare. Now, I looked it up and I found out that at the time, and I don't know what it is today, but it's probably close to it, but life expectancy of Afghans is somewhere in the vicinity of 63, 64, 65. That's very low compared to the Western world. So I understood all of a sudden here, like, wow, He was in a hurry to be educated and make a difference before he would die. I don't think I've met many students who have thought like that. And he perhaps was in a minority of people in Afghanistan thinking that way. But that tells you something as to the importance of what you do. And the provost that I was there, Jeff Belknap, who really, I think, ushered the university into being a real university with his changes and what he did in the years of 2017, 18, I think it became a real university right around that time. He said to me when he had to leave, he left in 2019 because of family situations. He said, I don't want to leave, Arni, because this is and will be the most important job I will ever have. And that also struck me very hard, and I have used that since from Jeff Belknap. I say, like, he was right. It's absolutely the case for me, is that this is the most important job that I've ever had and will ever have. Because the impact is so immediate and profound. There is, these people go out and try actually to change their world on the basis of what you are teaching them. So it means it's not just the classroom, it's not just the theory, it's not just, me teaching them marketing or leadership or decision making. It's what else am I teaching them? What am I imparting to them? This is why it's so important for me. Is like, one of the points that we talked about earlier was like, the male-female collaboration and how male-female, sort of interaction works at AUAF. I've always maintained that we absolutely cannot make this a female university. So some people thought like, well, the females needed more. I said, I get that, but the females will get nowhere unless we educate the males. Because if they get taught the misogynistic ways, elsewhere, who is going to teach them how to respect women, how to realize that women are just as intelligent, driven, wonderful human beings as males are? We have to have a sizable, important number of males that will learn that through us, along with what they simply have learned in their families. And there are, not to say that AUAF is the only place that does that. There are young men that come in there and obviously have been taught by their families, by their parents, to respect women and understand the value of women. But we have to help with that. We have to really have conversations about that. And the males have to learn to listen to the women and really get what they're going through, what they're dealing with, and how they can better champion the rights of women. And I think that that's one of the great things about what we do, one of the greatest things that we do, actually, in my mind, is that those conversations take place. And I think that the men learn just as much if not more than the females when it comes to that interaction and that dynamic.
That's a profound point. I think I absolutely agree. In my conversations with you in the past, you've mentioned things like, being the voice in the darkness as well. And I think you've described the role of communication and educator in that sense, that being a voice in the darkness. And you're absolutely right that you get so much from the family and the context and the society, but once you get to university, these understandings about, respecting women's rights needs to be institutionalized and put in the framework of an understanding in an institutional way and what that actually translates in practice into workplace and into other spheres of life. So I think the university was doing a great job and is doing a great job in that regard. So if I can bring the conversation a bit forward and fast forward, I would have. I'm one of those people who does not like using the word unfortunately, but
Mhm.
unfortunately, we are in a situation where since 2021, there is a reversal. So particularly on female education.
Yeah.
Um, and there are still opportunities, online classes and institutions who teach and continue to teach. But this reversal, how do you see that in terms of, what we were doing before, where we were physically present and all of these interactions and achievements were taking place? I mean, I should mention for kind of contextual understanding that in 2001, uh, there is close to zero, very little female enrollment. Fast forward to 5 years to 2005, there are, I think, an estimated average of 4 million female students in Afghanistan who are enrolled and who are in education. And then
Mhm.
from then on, there is this exponential upward, enrollment, graduation, participating in various spheres of life. And as that republic period goes through, there is funding, there are schools that are opened, there are various opportunities, and internet and TV and all of these things have kinds of effect that we do not know a priori. So basically, we don't know what kind of impact having access to an internet and a smartphone has. But you can actually see this in Afghanistan as a before and after situation. So,
Yep.
or you do not understand fully the impact of having a new TV channel. But there were various TV channels that started in 2006, 2008, and they were
Mhm.
champions of these cultural and social revolutions that took place and changes that took place in Afghanistan. So unfortunately, we've had that reversal with the regime change in 2021, and the most affected segment of the society is females and women education. How do you see that, and how do you see your role as an educator? What can we do? Is this in this next chapter?
Well, if you look at if I show you the big picture, right? Big picture
Please.
is that we're just doing one intake a year. We used to do two. We would bring in, say, 100 to 150 students in, right? And we still do the same thing where we bring in about 150, maybe 200 now, right? But the big picture is that at that time, prior to 2021, and I was in charge of admissions because I was the vice president then, and we would get sort of 700 or 800 applications, right? And out of those, maybe half of them actually were qualified. Okay. Today, we're getting 6,000 applications every year.
6,000.
And so, part of it is that people see this as a beacon of light. Like one of the reputations we got that was an erroneous one is that people were going to get out of Afghanistan through our education. That was because we moved certain students out, but we moved out about 400 students back in 21 and 22. We can go into that detail, but I'm not going to in terms of there's a lot of sort of, we don't know how right we did or how wrong we did with all that. But that's just the way that it was. We did
And it's a
that.
very small percentage of the total
Yes,
cohort and
exactly.
students.
Exactly. I mean, we would have about 900 students at the time, and less than a half actually, got out. But I think people have realized that's not going to happen anymore. But people feel, especially females, of course, it's like, hey, this is our only recourse of getting an education. So we're now getting all these numbers, and luckily we've had enough organizations and governments fund us in the sense that we can now bring these people in and educate them. But we can only do so much. There's just a certain number we can bring in. So that's sort of like the big picture of the thousands that are coming in, and we can only take a little. So that tells you a little bit about how desperate, especially the women, are to get some sort of learning. In that context, also, of course, what we have done, just to put in a context, we had an academy before going to university, which was 1 year sort of English, IT, and math before they actually went to an undergraduate program. Okay, that existed already. We started reaching further back once we left, in 2022, 23, realizing, well, the young women are not getting any education in high school, so we have to teach them that and have to bring them up to a level where they can be university students, right? So that was a realization as well. People could, get further education if at all possible. That is difficult, and we've tried to do that, and we have limits when it comes to that, but we have tried to do a little bit of that. There are other organizations that have attempted to bridge this gap as well. And there's a lot of things going on. A lot of young Afghans, for example, have worked on that on behalf of their fellow females, immigrants or refugees who are in Germany or in Malta or whatever have tried to help their fellow students. So it's incredible what these young people have done. So, there are a lot of things going on in terms of helping women. And I have, I've been amazed at how courageous a lot of these people are when it comes to that. Now, if we take a look at it on a micro level, and if we, I'll give you an example. I do this thing in my classroom, the undergraduate program, a couple of times a semester where I throw out a certain thing that gives them an opportunity to talk about their lives, and I just end up spending most of the class on that. In that sense, the women in particular, they will learn in my classes for sure. This is a forum. This is an opportunity. And I do talk to them about, what I experienced in Kabul, and then I connect to that because he's like, oh, he has been in Kabul. He knows us. It's a different feeling to that when they realize that. And and I talk to them in such a way that like, for example, just this last week, the young women started talking about the unfairness of the situation and what they're having to go through and what they believe and what they don't believe and how the Quran should be interpreted and all this stuff. And I always said, like, I plead complete ignorance when it comes to those things because I know nothing about the Quran and how it should or should not be interpreted. And I said, I'm not going to go into that conversation, but I let them sort of vent their frustrations, their thoughts, what they're dealing with. And I do that because I want them all to hear each other. Because I have found out through the years is that when a young woman speaks, there's another woman who is listening to her and saying, oh, I thought it was only me. I thought only I felt this way. I thought I was the only one who has gone through this. And when they hear each other and they realize that they're all in this together, I think that's an incredible uh, sort of discovery that they make, and it connects them in a way where, I often say this to them, and I say this in the MBA program too. You have an opportunity. You've been thrown here together by coincidence. You don't necessarily know each other, but you can create a group, a friendship, a connection that will last forever, and you can make a difference in each other's lives. And so that to me is a very important component for these young women today, because I think one of the big issues is isolation, because when when you can't go out, you can't do things, you're just with your family. And although your family may be wonderful and all that, there is a sociological isolation going on that can really be harmful. So it's an opportunity for them to do that. I will ask them, sometimes in April. I do this in the latter part of the semester. I sort of fell into this. I just sort of by coincidence did this one time, and I was like, whoa, this really created an unbelievable response. Where I put out the question, I started this with the MBA students, but I also do it now with the undergraduate students, where I say, like, I want you to answer this question: can I make a difference? And it's for them to really think about them in context of society. And some of them start thinking like, well, it's only me. I can't make a difference. And then there are others who speak up and say, yes, I can, and I will. And it creates this unbelievable conversation. And some of the students will share stories of like, this is what I'm doing now. Like one of my MBA students who quit his job in 2021 after Taliban came, was in like he said, highly paid job, went to his province and started a school for girls. And that's what he's doing today. And he's been beaten once by the Taliban, and they've told him to stop. And he has sort of said, yes, sir, I will do that. My mistake, all this stuff. And then he just starts over again and keeps on teaching those girls, and has a network of people teaching and girls coming in and learning the basics. He's a hero. He's an unbelievable person. And when fellow students hear this, it's remarkable the effects that they have. Same thing going on at the undergraduate level. You'll find out the students are doing certain things. And it's like one young woman said, I was so upset, I was depressed and all this stuff. But then I realized that my 5 younger sisters were all looking up to me. And I was making them sad and depressed. And I realized I had to do something. So I said, I'm going to go to university. I'm going to show them that we can make an impact, that we are people who can make a difference, and all that. And all those stories, when they come out, and people, and that's exactly what I want them to get out of it, that making a difference isn't just about, societal change. It's about the little changes, the little things that you do. It's like I pointed out to him, it's like, if you need to bring down a wall, you can run against the wall time and time again and all that stuff, and it won't work. The wall will stand. But if you have a chisel and a small hammer and start just picking away at the wall, it may take a long time, but eventually the wall will fall. So those conversations I found to be absolutely amazing. And, I throw out the question, then the students just sort of take over and they start talking, and it's like, yes, I can make a difference. And some of them have actually reported to me, like, afterwards, like, this question really bothered me because I didn't know if I could. And then I heard others say that they're doing something, and I felt bad because I didn't feel that I could do something. And then I saw like, well, if she can do it, why can't I? Why? So there's this dynamic that takes place and this sort of sense of, I think, hope in a way, in a way of saying like, yeah, there are ways, and there's a difference between, and I actually learned this from a song of one of my favorite songwriters many years ago. It's like, I'm not saying I can change the world, but I can say I can change my world.
Mm.
And if I change my world, that means that that can have a cascading effect to others over time in such a way that something good will happen. So I think that those things, in a sense, I know I've sort of rambled on in terms of it, but I think it's very, very important to understand that that's what we're doing today with these young women. And fundamentally, Ludwig, nothing has really changed. We are doing exactly the same thing that we need to be doing, which is to educate young people and give them the tools, the confidence, the power that they gain from this, not just in terms of economics and marketing and things like that, but in terms of attitude, in terms of collaboration, in terms of time management, in terms of learning the critical thinking process and the creative process and how to lead and how to learn from mistakes time and time again. That's what we're giving them more than anything else. I've done this for years, where I said to them, like, I I take a curriculum, and I did this at AUAF, where I take a curriculum and I said, let's identify all the important soft skills that we talk about. I don't like that term very much. I don't think they're necessarily soft skills, but they're called that. And embed them into every course at least twice, and preferably more, where we can learn those things through whatever topic that we're teaching them. So there's going to be a leadership exercise somewhere. There's going to be creative exercise somewhere. There's going to be a time management exercise somewhere. And understand that education is far more comprehensive today than it is just for you and me to stand in our ivory tower and dispel the wisdom of economics and marketing.
That is absolutely true. I fundamentally agree with that and resonate. I think what you just said is the role of an educator is to instill critical thinking, the discipline, and much broader set of skills than just a number of various definitions and formulas and, things to memorize. I
Mhm.
think that's what fundamentally university education should be about, and education in general should be about, is learning the value system, learning, the discipline, and the, getting all these transferable skills. You call them soft skills. I'm going to call them transferable skills
Mhm.
that you can use them in various environments. I think you talked about a number of key messages there, so I'm going to leave it there because we're almost running out of time. It's been we have 3 minutes, and I think you talked about, the shifting role of an educator. You talked about what we're aiming for through these education, these setups that have emerged post 2021. I want to add two things. Number one, that there are a lot of small and big institutions that have emerged, that have been established by, recently moved Afghans out of Afghanistan, or people who are still in Afghanistan. So I know numerous examples, and this actually talks directly to the resilience that we were talking about, and the
Mhm.
wish and the need for and a response to that demand, that there is a demand for education for this kind of value system. So this is very courageous, and I think a lot of more a number of more organizations are coming up, and this should be proliferated, and we should have more of them. And hopefully this continues. The second thing is this idea of you know what you can change personally, that very specific idea of what can I do to change myself, and then that would have cascading impacts on the society. Most of the time, our conversations kind of are at a political level, they are at a policy level, and then they get dragged into these macro conversations that we forget the importance of, individual change and micro changes that we can do. And those are so essential as a first step, as a stepping stone. And I completely agree with what you said, that more of our education system should be about that, should be about re-diverting students' attentions from macro and from the news, which is a macro level conversation, to a much more targeted, tailored at a micro level thinking that, change yourself. And you mentioned that they bring up how Quran should be interpreted. There is, given that I know the background, maybe I should add to that. There is a verse in the Quran that says, change yourself, and then you will change the society.
There you go.
So it definitely resonates with the religious teachings as well. Um, and yeah, I think that's a great thing. I'm going to hand over back to you. So we have a couple of more minutes. We can go over a bit over the time. If I haven't asked anything that you wanted to say, please do share. And we had a question from Miriam as well, who said, what can we do to ensure that education programs kind of include women's voices in various feedbacks, reports, and decision making? And I think that's the kind of conversations that we are trying to avoid. It's a macro level, policy level. While they're important, absolutely, but we need to appreciate the different levels of changes that we can instill, that we can channel through.
Yeah,
And there are various organizations, I think they're doing that. So yeah,
yeah.
hand over to
But
you.
I think,
Anything that you want
yeah,
to add that I haven't asked, please go ahead.
I think that's exactly, it's a good question, but
Yeah.
again, just if you give them a forum, if you give them a platform to speak, the women, it brings about confidence, and it brings about belief that you are not alone in this conversation. And as soon as you start having a collective, which is, of course, one of the things that dictators and regimes hate, which is a collective that realizes, hey, this is wrong. You are creating that today at this level. And I think that's what needs to happen. I've often said this, and I've said this in various things, that like, I can light a fire for you, you know, but I'm an outsider. I can light the fire, but then you have to keep it alive. You have to continue to stoke it and make it bigger and bigger. That's your responsibility as Afghans, or whatever minority group that I have talked to about this. It's your responsibility. That's why communication is so important. Like, we had bombings and some things going on with Pakistan right now. We don't know what impact that will have. Immediately on Friday, the only thing I did very, very quickly, sent a message to my students saying, just thinking of you. And, I hope you're staying safe. And that was it. I can't do anything else. But just by doing that, and I know this from experience because I did this after the fall of Kabul and all stuff, I did this just about every day to the students. Just by them hearing that somebody is thinking about them, somebody is just helping them, just like focus, it's like, hey, stay safe, things like that, makes a massive difference. And when you do that, there's an immediacy to it. You have to do that as quickly as possible because people get scared. They are traumatized. And I had several students send something back. It's like, thanks for doing that. I really appreciate that. And that's it. And I'm not doing this for any type of appreciation. I just know what it means when you throw that out there. And as soon as you do that, there is a certain, and I've noticed that there's a certain element that gets created where the students all of a sudden trusting you more, and they start talking to you more, and they start saying like, oh, okay, there is something, he's not just a guy who's teaching us marketing, but he is somebody who actually cares about what happens to us. I think that that's a really, really big thing. I mean, it's like, and you've heard this from people in the Ukraine, you've heard this from people in Gaza, where they say like, well, has the world abandoned us or hasn't it? And if the world is listening, if it's seeing us, if it's trying to do something, then there is still hope. And I think that that's something that we as educators are not doing enough of today, which is to sort of tap into that these young people, they're all, wherever they are, I've seen this in the United States too, they sometimes just need somebody to tell them it's okay. You don't know where they're coming from, what their circumstances are, right? I've had students from broken homes, students that are former gang members in the United States, or students that dealt with drug problems. It runs the gamut, right? In Afghanistan, I've had a couple of women talk to me about they're getting forced into a marriage, and they ask, what should I do? It's not my job to, and I fundamentally do not have the knowledge or the skill set to give them advice. But what I can do and what we can do is to focus them in terms of, well, what are your options? Just focus down on what you can and cannot do. What kind of solutions might you want to consider? And help them to become those independent thinkers that they need to be. Those are things that I think is very, very important, because I don't want them to be reliant on me. They have to continue when I'm gone out of their lives to really improve their lives and do things that they need to do to be those independent thinkers and leaders. So I think it's very, very important to establish that connection at first and say like, hey, we can trust this guy. He's saying something that is valuable to me. And then you can, after that, just sort of say, okay, I can use this. I can be this or be that, whatever that may be. And there's, I'll end with this. About 15 years ago, I was teaching in Mexico. And there was this young woman who was there, and she was really lovely, not the greatest student or anything like that. But I noticed something about her in terms of the classroom. When I often put kids together in groups and work together and things like that too, and they learn certain skills there. And I said to her, listen, you could be a really good leader. You're showing some really good leadership skills. Well, not too long ago, I got a message from her, like many, many years later. And she said, I just want to tell you, Dr. Arni, that when you said this to me, nobody had ever said this to me before. Now, this is no big deal to me. I say this all the time to different students just to sort of, encourage them, to say things like that. It's very, very simple. And she said, it just stuck with me. And I started applying for being on the student council. And now I ran a club. And she said, today I am a leader at my company. And she said, if you hadn't said this to me, I don't know if I would be where I am. That is the power that we have. And it means really nothing.
As educators.
Yeah, it's nothing. It's nothing big deal. It's not a big deal for us. It's nothing special to me. I'm not imparting this thinking, oh, this is going to have a profound impact. But for for 10 people who don't really pay attention to it, and it doesn't matter to them that I say it to them, there's going to be one person who says, wow, somebody saw something in me that nobody else has, and it can change their lives. And so we have to continue to communicate, even though it's just very, very little things. I mean, it took me all of 2 minutes to send out these messages to these students on Friday about the bombing. And that's it. You just have no idea what you are capable of doing as an educator when you do little things like that. So the devil is in the details in terms of what we can do.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you so much for these reflections.
Mhm.
If there are any questions, please do send them in. We can answer questions as well. But I think the power that educators has and all these little things that you can do that have fundamental impacts and cascades throughout somebody's life is powerful, and we should appreciate those that role. Um, Thank you for everybody, all the guests, for joining us and listening patiently. And yeah, this has been a great conversation, Dr. Arni. Thank you for, agreeing to talk to us.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
All right. So yeah, with 10 minutes over the time, I think we can end here.
Okay.
And thank you so much. I'll
Take care,
see
everybody.
you around.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.